My name is Olivia Harris. I'm 32 years old, and I run a small interior design business. I've always believed in hard work, honesty, and keeping my promises. Growing up, my parents taught me that family comes first, that we should always be there for one another, no matter what. I held on to that belief like it was unshakable truth, until the day my own family proved me wrong. It all started on a chilly autumn evening. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled my in-laws' dining room as we gathered for one of our usual family dinners. The atmosphere was warm, the kind that made you feel like everything was just as it should be. I was sitting beside my husband, Daniel, listening to his parents talk about their upcoming vacation when my brother-in-law, Ethan, leaned in close to me. His voice dropped just enough to make it sound like a secret. "Liv, I hate to even ask, but I really need your help," he said, rubbing his temples like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Ethan had always been the charmer, the one who could talk his way in and out of anything. He had a habit of chasing big dreams, throwing himself into new business ideas that never quite worked out. But no matter how many times he failed, he always managed to land on his feet, usually with a little help from someone else. I hesitated. "What kind of help?" His eyes darted around the room before he sighed. "A small loan, just to hold me over for a bit. 10 grand. I blinked. 10 grand? "It's nothing to you, Liv," he said quickly, flashing that easygoing smile he always used to smooth things over. "You're doing great with your business, and you know I'd pay you back the second things pick up." I glanced at Daniel. He met my gaze but didn't say anything. He was always caught in the middle when it came to Ethan, and I knew that if I said no, it would turn into an issue, one that might create tension in the family. Against my better judgment, I exhaled and nodded. "All right, but this is a loan, Ethan, not a gift." He grinned, clapping a hand over his chest like I had just saved his life. "Of course. I'd never take advantage of you, Liv." I should have known better. A week later, Ethan showed up at my office unannounced. It was mid-afternoon, and I was in the middle of reviewing a client's design proposal when my assistant buzzed in to let me know he was waiting in the lobby. I sighed, already knowing why he was here. I had told him I needed time to move some money around, but patience was never Ethan's strong suit. When I stepped out, he was leaning casually against the reception desk, chatting up my assistant like he had all the time in the world. That was Ethan, always relaxed, always charming. But the moment he saw me, his smile widened like he had been waiting for his savior. "Liv, you look busy. Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, despite the fact that he clearly was. I folded my arms. "What's going on, Ethan?" He let out a dramatic sigh and shrugged. "Just checking in. Seeing how things are going." I knew what he really meant. "You mean the money?" He grinned sheepishly. "I wouldn't put it that bluntly, but yeah." I pressed my lips together, fighting the irritation bubbling up inside me. It had only been a week, but Ethan was always in a rush, especially when it came to things he wanted. "I told you I'd get it to you. I just need a little time to shift some funds," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded quickly. No, I get it. I totally understand. It's just, I kind of need it sooner than I thought. Some things came up." Of course they did. With Ethan, things were always coming up. I sighed and glanced at the clock. I didn't have time for this. "Fine. I'll transfer it today." His face lit up. "You're the best, Liv. Really. I don't know what I'd do without you." I didn't respond to that. Instead, I turned back toward my office, already regretting my decision. That evening, I wired the $10,000 to Ethan's account. As I hit send, I pushed away the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. This was temporary. He would pay me back? He had to. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "You just made a mistake." That evening, after a long day at work, I finally sat down at my desk at home, staring at my laptop screen. The payment page was open, Ethan's account details already filled in. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a strange sense of hesitation crept in. $10,000 wasn't a small amount. It wasn't something I could just brush off if things didn't go as planned. But family helps family. Wasn't that what I had always believed? I sighed, trying to shake off my doubts. Ethan had promised to pay me back. And despite his history of bad decisions, he wasn't a bad person. He just made questionable choices. He'd learn from this. Maybe this time things would actually work out for him. With one deep breath, I clicked the button and sent the transfer. A confirmation message popped up, and just like that, $10,000 left my account. My stomach twisted slightly, but I told myself it was fine. This was just a loan, nothing more. Not even 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Ethan, got it! You're a lifesaver, Liv. I owe you big time." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "Me. You do. Don't forget that." He responded almost immediately with a string of grateful emojis and a voice note I didn't bother listening to. Instead, I locked my phone and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Daniel walked into the room then, a towel draped over his shoulders from his shower. He glanced at me, noticing the tension in my face. "What's wrong?" I hesitated for a second before shaking my head. "Nothing. Just sent Ethan the money." Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand through his damp hair. "You didn't have to do that, Liv." I gave him a pointed look. "You know as well as I do that if I didn't, it would have caused drama." He didn't argue because we both knew the truth. Ethan had a way of making himself everyone's problem. If I had refused, he would have guilt-tripped us, maybe even pulled their parents into it, twisting the story to make himself seem like the victim. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his face thoughtful. "I just hope he actually pays you back." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "He will. I made sure he knew this was a loan, not a gift." Daniel didn't say anything, but the doubt in his expression mirrored my own unspoken fears. I wanted to believe Ethan would do the right thing, that for once he'd take responsibility. I wanted to believe it, but something deep down told me this wasn't the last conversation we'd have about that money. The first few weeks after sending the money were quiet. Too quiet. At first, Ethan was his usual self, texting me updates, talking about how the money had come at the perfect time, how this new opportunity he was working on was going to be huge. I didn't press him for details, because honestly, I didn't want to get sucked into another one of his grand stories. I just wanted him to focus, do whatever he needed to do, and pay me back. But then, the updates started slowing down. At first, he would text every few days, telling me how things were moving along and that he was finalizing some deals. Then, the messages stretched out to once a week. And before I knew it, 2 months had passed and Ethan had gone completely silent. I tried to be patient. I told myself he was probably busy, that he didn't need me breathing down his neck. But patience had never been my strongest trait, especially when it came to money. And when the silence stretched into 3 months, I finally decided I had waited long enough. One evening, after dinner, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at our last conversation. His message filled with gratitude, my firm reminder that this was a loan. I tapped out a quick message, keeping my tone light but direct. Me. Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's going well. Any updates on when you'll be able to send something back? I stared at the screen, waiting for the little typing bubbles to appear. Nothing. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. Still nothing. Daniel, sitting beside me, glanced at my phone. Still no response? I shook my head, frustration simmering beneath my skin. He read it, though. Daniel sighed, leaning back. You knew this might happen. I gritted my teeth. Yeah, but I trusted him. I didn't want to believe that Ethan was deliberately ignoring me. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he was embarrassed that he didn't have the money yet. Maybe. My phone buzzed. My heart jumped as I saw Ethan's name pop up. Finally. Ethan. Hey, Liv. Sorry, things have been crazy. I haven't forgotten about you, I swear. Just need a little more time. Things are still coming together. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening around the phone. Still coming together. The same phrase he had used 100 times before. I wasn't sure what annoyed me more, his excuse or the fact that I had expected anything different. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan continued to dodge me. At first, I tried to be understanding. I gave him space, hoping he would reach out on his own. But each time I texted, the responses became shorter, more vague. Me. Hey, just checking in again. It's been a while. Any update? Ethan. Hey. Yeah. Working on it. Soon, I promise. Soon. That was all he ever said. No dates, no details, just an empty word that meant nothing. I tried calling him one evening, determined to get a real answer. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again. This time, it went straight to voicemail. He had declined the call. That was when I knew. Ethan wasn't just struggling to pay me back. He was avoiding me. I set my phone down with a sharp exhale, my frustration boiling over. Daniel, who had been watching from across the room, finally spoke. Still nothing. I shook my head. He's ignoring me. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Liv, I hate to say it, but I don't think he ever planned to pay you back. His words hit me harder than I expected. Of course he planned to, I argued, though the confidence in my voice wavered. He promised. Daniel frowned. Ethan makes a lot of promises. I clenched my jaw, refusing to accept it. I'm not just letting this go. He doesn't get to take 10 grand and pretend it never happened. Daniel hesitated, then sighed. Then you're going to have to do something about it. Because Ethan, he's not going to bring it up unless you force him to. I knew he was right. I had been patient long enough. It was time to stop waiting for Ethan to do the right thing. The next morning, I decided to go see him in person. If he wouldn't answer my calls, then I'd give him no choice but to talk to me. I grabbed my car keys, my pulse steady but my mind racing. Ethan could make excuses over the phone all he wanted, but face to face, he'd have to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. And I was ready to hear it, no matter what it was. I arrived at Ethan's apartment just before noon, the sun high in the sky but my stomach heavy with a mixture of anger and anxiety. His building was in the heart of the city, a slightly run-down complex that never seemed to live up to its promising ads. I parked my car and stood there for a moment, staring up at the peeling paint on the walls, the cracked windows. This was his life, a collection of half-promises and fading dreams. I climbed the stairs to his floor, my mind replaying every conversation I'd had with him over the last few months. Each time, I had given him more of my trust, more of my patience. But now, I realized I was the one being fooled. I had been blind to the truth all along. I knocked on his door, my knuckles meeting the wood with a sharp, determined rap. The silence that followed felt almost suffocating. After a few moments, I heard shuffling behind the door before Ethan's familiar voice called out, "Just a second." I waited, arms crossed over my chest. When the door finally creaked open, Ethan stood there looking disheveled. His hair messy, his shirt untucked, a look of surprise on his face when he saw me standing there. "Liv?" His voice was tinged with a hint of guilt, though he quickly masked it with a smile. "What are you doing here?" I didn't let him off the hook. "We need to talk." His smile faltered, and for a second, I saw something. Regret, maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. I walked in, glancing around the cluttered apartment. It was a mess. Clothes thrown on the couch, empty takeout containers scattered on the counter. This wasn't the place of someone who had their life together, someone who was working hard to pay back a loan. Ethan closed the door behind me and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I'm sorry for not answering your calls, Liv. Things have just been hectic." I didn't mince words. "I'm done with the excuses, Ethan. I want my money." His expression shifted, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of the defensive reaction I was bracing for, he looked almost frustrated. "You don't get it, do you? I am working on it. But things aren't as easy as you think they are. I've been trying, Liv. Really." I met his gaze, my heart racing as I fought to keep my voice steady. "Then where is it? You said you'd pay me back when things turned around. You promised." He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his messy hair. "You really think I can just snap my fingers and make money appear? Things aren't going as planned, okay? There's been more delays, more setbacks. I'm this close to making it, but I need more time. Please just, no." The word slipped out before I could stop it. "You don't get to ask for more time. You're not a child, Ethan. You're a grown man who borrowed money from me, and I'm done waiting." He stared at me for a long moment, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see the wheels turning in his head, calculating his next move. "Liv, Where's my money, Ethan?" I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to make it clear I wasn't going to back down. For a moment, Ethan didn't say anything. The silence stretched out uncomfortably before he finally muttered, "I can't pay you back right now." "I'm sorry. I really am." I felt the weight of his words hit me, the crushing realization that I had been right all along. He wasn't going to pay me back. "Then what?" I asked, my voice a whisper now, the anger draining from me. "What happens now?" Ethan looked away, his face a mask of frustration and helplessness. "You can't rush these things, Liv. You know how it is. You've been patient for this long. Just give me a little more time." I shook my head, my heart sinking further. This is it. I gave you a chance. I'm done asking." The room was silent again, and for the first time, Ethan didn't have an answer. I left Ethan's apartment feeling colder than I had when I arrived, the weight of his words settling heavily in my chest. His promises, his excuses, they all seemed so hollow now. He didn't even try to offer any solution. It was as though he had already given up on the idea of paying me back, and in doing so, he had given up on our relationship. I drove home in a daze, barely noticing the familiar streets, the cars, or the pedestrians. All I could think about was the betrayal I felt, not just from Ethan, but from myself. I had trusted him. I had believed in his words, in his empty promises. And now it was clear. I had been taken for a fool. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a few moments, gathering my thoughts. I couldn't just walk away from this. I couldn't let him get away with it. Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked through the door. He didn't even need to ask. The look on my face said everything. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice soft, careful. I dropped my purse onto the counter, my hands trembling slightly. "He didn't pay me anything. He didn't even try to offer a real solution. He just kept saying he needs more time, that things are this close to turning around. And I'm done waiting, Daniel. I'm done." Daniel's expression softened, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "So, what now?" I ran a hand through my hair, frustration building again. "I'm not going to let him get away with it. I'm not going to just pretend like nothing happened. He owes me that money, Daniel. $10,000. I'm not backing down." I could see the worry in Daniel's face. "Liv, you know if you push this, it could tear the family apart. Ethan's always been the one who, well, avoids responsibility. But going after him like this, it might make things worse." I stood in silence for a moment, weighing his words. Part of me wanted to listen to Daniel, to take the safer route, to just let it go. But every fiber of my being screamed against it. I had worked hard for everything I had. I had trusted him. And now, it felt like if I didn't stand up for myself, I would be nothing more than a pushover. "No, I can't," I finally said, my voice firm. "He's not going to walk away from this. I'm going to sue him." Daniel looked at me, a mixture of disbelief and concern in his eyes. "You're serious?" I nodded. "I've waited long enough. And if I have to go through the courts to get my money back, then that's what I'll do. I'm done being nice." The idea of taking legal action felt like stepping into unknown territory, but there was no other option left. I had given Ethan time, and now it was time to make him face the consequences of his actions. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the details, the loan, the broken promises, the silence, and explained that I was prepared to move forward with a lawsuit. My lawyer was efficient, and within a few days, the paperwork was in motion. But even as I signed the documents, a part of me felt a twinge of sadness. I had never imagined things would come to this. I had always seen Ethan as family, but now I was about to expose his lies to the entire family. And I knew that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. The lawsuit was officially filed, and I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. I had taken the first step, and now the wheels were in motion. But as the days passed, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about Ethan. It was about the trust that had been broken, and the fact that I was about to drag our entire family into this mess. The first few days after the filing were eerily quiet. Ethan didn't contact me at all, and the silence made the weight of the situation feel even more suffocating. I knew he had to have found out by now. Word spread fast in our family, and if Ethan hadn't heard from his lawyer yet, he'd soon be facing my lawyer's letter. I was right. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. My stomach churned when I saw it, knowing full well it was Ethan. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Liv." Ethan's voice came through the phone, his tone defensive but strained. "I just got your lawyer's letter." I didn't even try to hide the coldness in my voice. "I thought you might." He was silent for a long moment, and I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. "Look, Liv, this isn't what you think. I wasn't trying to rip you off. You know how things have been for me." I cut him off before he could continue. "I gave you time, Ethan. I gave you chances, and you kept coming up with excuses. You think I'm going to keep waiting around while you play games? I've had enough." He didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought he might finally realize the gravity of what he'd done. But then, he spoke again, his voice tinged with frustration. "You think this is easy for me? I'm doing everything I can to get that money back to you. You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. I didn't take it on purpose." I could feel my patience slipping away. "No, you didn't take it on purpose. But you did lie. You lied about paying me back, and now you're avoiding me. This isn't a misunderstanding, Ethan. This is a pattern with you." There was a long pause on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice sounded different, less defensive, more resigned. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear. I don't know what to say to make this right." I didn't answer immediately, feeling the sting of his words. The guilt was there, yes, but it didn't erase the fact that he had pushed me too far. "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat me like I was just another person you could ignore," I said coldly. "You're going to have to answer for this, Ethan. You don't get to keep pretending it didn't happen." There was no response for a long time. I could hear the sound of him breathing, and then he muttered something I couldn't make out. "I have to go, Ethan. Don't call me again unless you have the money. We're done talking." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming next, but deep down, I knew I had no choice. The path I had chosen was set, and there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my lawyer. The family had been notified. Ethan's refusal to pay back the loan and his financial struggles had been exposed, and now the legal process was in full swing. The feeling of exposure hit me like a wave, knowing that soon everyone would know the truth, and soon Ethan would have to answer for his lies, not just to me, but to our family. The thought of facing everyone terrified me. Ethan had always been the golden child, the one who got away with things. I wasn't sure how my family would react. Would they side with me, or would they defend him? Would they believe me when they heard the whole story? All I knew was that things were about to get complicated, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the storm that was coming. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and anticipation. But despite everything I was juggling, my mind kept circling back to Ethan. The lawsuit was no longer just a legal matter. It had become something far more personal. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the sense that I was about to lose him forever, that whatever was left of our relationship would be irreparably damaged. A week later, the inevitable happened. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee and scrolling through emails when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Mom, Liv, can you call me as soon as you get a chance? It's about Ethan." My heart dropped into my stomach. I had been dreading this moment, knowing the family would start to hear the truth soon. I immediately dialed her number, anxiety gnawing at me. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Liv, what's going on?" Her voice was strained, her concern obvious. "I just got a call from Ethan, and he's really upset." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "Mom, I'm not the one who put him in this situation. He owes me money, and he's been avoiding me for months. I didn't have a choice." I know, but this is tearing him apart, Liv. He's telling me that he's going to lose everything, that he's already struggling, and now this lawsuit." Her voice faltered, and I could hear the worry in her words. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Mom. He keeps saying he's sorry, but then he keeps making excuses. And I've given him enough chances. I can't just let him walk away from this. He owes me, and I need him to take responsibility." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I understand. I do. But I think you need to understand that Ethan, he's scared. He's always been good at pretending everything's fine, but he's not fine. He doesn't know how to handle this, Liv." The words stung, and I felt a flash of frustration. "I don't know what you want me to do, Mom. He made his choices. I'm done playing nice." "I'm not asking you to play nice. I just want you to think about the bigger picture. You're not just hurting Ethan here, Liv. You're hurting the family. We can't just pretend everything's okay. You know how he is. This is going to affect all of us." Her words echoed in my mind as the call ended. The weight of the conversation hung over me, and for the first time, I questioned whether I had done the right thing. Was it really worth it? Was this fight about the money, or was it about something else? But the doubts didn't linger for long. I knew I couldn't let Ethan get away with it. He had crossed a line, and no amount of family pressure would make me back down. If I didn't stand up for myself now, I might never get the chance again. The very next day, my phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan. "Liv," he began, his voice sounding different, worn down, almost pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I promised you I'd pay you back, and I haven't. But I'm asking you, please, just give me a little more time. I'll figure it out, I swear." I closed my eyes, the exhaustion of everything weighing on me. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but it wasn't enough to make me give in. "No, Ethan. I've given you enough time," I said, my voice firm. "You've had months to make it right. I'm not going to sit around while you play games. It's too late for more excuses." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you, Liv. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I'm scared." For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He had always been good at making people feel sorry for him, but I couldn't let that cloud my judgment now. "You should have thought about that before you took my money and ran, Ethan," I said, the bitterness in my voice sharp. "You don't get to pull the scared card now." "I'll pay you back," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice again. "I promise. Just please, don't do this. Don't go through with the lawsuit." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "I've already made my decision. I'm done waiting." The silence on the other end felt suffocating. I could hear Ethan breathing heavily, as if he were trying to gather the right words, the right plea. But nothing he said could change my mind. The truth had come out, and there was no turning back now. "Goodbye, Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions raging inside me. I hung up the phone before he could say anything else, leaving the call to linger in the air between us like an unfinished story. And just like that, everything had changed. Ethan was no longer the person I trusted. And I was no longer the person who would let him walk all over me. The following days felt like a blur, a whirlwind of conversations and emotions I wasn't sure how to handle. The family found out, as I knew they would. Ethan's phone calls became increasingly frantic, but I ignored each one. I wasn't going to let him guilt-trip me into backing down. The lawsuit was in motion, and now I had to see it through, no matter how uncomfortable it made everyone around me. It wasn't long before the inevitable confrontation happened at the family gathering. My parents had planned it for a Saturday evening, just a simple dinner. They had no idea what had been going on behind closed doors, but they could feel the tension hanging thick in the air when I walked in. The first thing I noticed was Ethan, sitting at the kitchen table with his head down. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something much darker, shame maybe, or fear. Either way, It didn't matter to me anymore. I took a deep breath as I entered, my mind focused and determined. Ethan glanced up when I walked into the room, but quickly looked away, as if he couldn't face me. I walked past him, making my way to the counter where my mom had set out the appetizers. The room was unnervingly silent, except for the soft clinking of dishes and utensils. My mom was the first to break the silence. "Liv, honey, how are you?" Her voice was gentle, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, offering her a tight smile. "Just a little busy with work." But she wasn't fooled. "Liv, is everything okay with you and Ethan? You two haven't been talking much lately." I hesitated for just a second before I spoke, feeling the weight of the words I had to say. "It's complicated, Mom, and I think it's time you knew why." The room fell deathly quiet, everyone's attention now on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to face them all. I wasn't going to let Ethan control the narrative anymore. I wasn't going to be the one hiding the truth. Ethan's head shot up, his eyes wide with panic. "Liv, don't!" But I didn't let him finish. I looked directly at my parents, at the rest of the family who had gathered in the room. "I'm suing Ethan," I said, my voice steady, though it felt like a bomb had just dropped into the middle of our dinner table. The shock on everyone's faces was instantaneous. My father, who rarely showed any emotion, was the first to speak, his tone a mix of disbelief and concern. "What do you mean, Liv? What's going on?" I swallowed hard, the weight of my decision now fully sinking in. "He owes me money, $10,000, and he's refused to pay me back. I've been waiting for months, giving him time, but he keeps making excuses. And now, he's trying to convince me it was a gift." The room seemed to hold its breath as everyone processed my words. My mom's face turned pale, her hands trembling slightly as she put down the glass she was holding. "Liv, are you sure about this? Ethan's your brother. You know how hard things have been for him." I could see the conflict in her eyes, the pull between her loyalty to me and her instinct to defend Ethan, but there was no room for doubt in my mind anymore. "Mom, I'm sure. He has no intention of paying me back. I've given him every chance, and now I'm done waiting. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about trust." Ethan looked furious now, his fists clenched at his sides. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Liv, this is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. This is family. You can't just sue me like this." I met his gaze, my heart racing, but my resolve unwavering. "You had your chances, Ethan. You had time to make things right. But you didn't. And now, I'm doing what I have to do." The silence in the room stretched on, broken only by the sound of Ethan's heavy breathing. It was clear the rest of the family didn't know how to react. They all loved Ethan, but they also saw me as their daughter, their sister. They were torn between the two of us. But it wasn't just my family I was up against now. It was the weight of everything Ethan had ever done, everything he had lied about, and the realization that I was finally confronting him head on. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. My mom walked over to Ethan, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, you need to make this right. This isn't just about the money. It's about the hurt you've caused. You can't keep running away from your responsibilities." Ethan's face twisted in anger, and for a moment I thought he might lash out, but then something shifted in his eyes, something that felt like resignation. He slumped back down in his chair, his shoulders sagging as if the fight had left him entirely. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt anyone." For a brief moment, I saw the man I had once known, vulnerable, confused, lost. But then I remembered the months of broken promises, the excuses, the lies. That man was gone, and in his place was someone who had made choices that couldn't be undone. "I know, Ethan," I said softly, my voice quieter now, but still firm. "But you have to face the consequences." The room was thick with tension, and as I looked around at my family, I realized that things would never be the same again. The fight had begun, and there was no turning back now. The next steps were already set in motion, and no matter what, we would all have to live with the fallout. The fallout from the family dinner lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan barely spoke to me in the days that followed, and the atmosphere at home was tense. It wasn't just the lawsuit that was hanging over us. It was the sense that everything was slowly unraveling. Our family, once tightly knit, now seemed to be drifting apart, each of us struggling with where to stand in this mess. My phone buzzed one afternoon while I was sitting at my desk. I checked it, and to my surprise, it was a message from Ethan. "Ethan, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to hear him out, maybe even listen to his side of the story one last time. But the other part, the part that had been hurt by his lies, the part that had made the decision to stand up for myself, knew I couldn't afford to go back now. He'd had enough chances, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me again. I put my phone down, determined to move forward, but my mind kept drifting back to the past. To the brother I had once trusted, the one who had always been the charming one in the family. Ethan had always been able to get away with things, always able to talk his way out of trouble. He had a way of making people believe in him, even when the truth was staring them in the face. I had been his biggest supporter, always covering for him, always excusing his mistakes. But now, there was no denying it anymore. Days passed, and the tension continued to build. The lawsuit was still in process, and I had to prepare myself for the inevitable confrontation that would come when the family learned more about what Ethan had done. My lawyer had informed me that the next step was a formal hearing, and I braced myself for the emotional strain it would bring. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was the thought of facing Ethan again, of seeing the disappointment in his eyes, the anger and the guilt. I knew it was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. Then, one evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Liv," a voice said, and I immediately recognized it as my mother. "Mom?" I asked, my voice tight. "What's going on?" "Ethan. He's not doing well, Liv," she said, her voice strained, full of concern. "He's really shaken up. He's been holed up in his apartment for days now, and I'm worried about him." I let out a breath, not sure how to respond. Part of me felt bad for him, seeing him like this. But then the anger crept in, that bitterness that had been building inside me for months. He had done this to himself, hadn't he? He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. "I don't know what you want me to do, Mom," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "He's the one who got us into this mess. I'm not the one who lied." "I know, Liv," she said softly, "but I just think you need to hear him out. Please, he's your brother. He's not well, and I think he's finally realizing the weight of everything that's happened." I paused, considering her words. My heart ached hearing her so worried, but I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Mom," I finally admitted. "I don't know if I can go back to how things were before." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could hear her breathing, and for a moment, I thought she might say something more. But instead, she simply said, "Just think about it, Liv. That's all I'm asking. Think about it." The conversation ended, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The doubts crept in again. Was I being too harsh? Was I wrong to push him away, to take this battle to the courts? I had no answers, no easy way out of the emotional labyrinth I was stuck in. But what I did know was that I had to stay true to myself. I couldn't let him use me anymore. I couldn't let him manipulate me into doing something I wasn't ready for. The next morning, I was sitting in my car, ready to head to my lawyer's office for the hearing, when I got another message from Ethan. My hands shook as I read it. "Ethan, I'm sorry, Liv. I really am. I know I messed up and I know you're hurt, but I can't keep living like this. I'm asking you one last time, please don't do this. Please don't sue me." I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the apology I had been waiting for, the one I thought I needed to hear before I could move on. But now that it was here, it felt like too little, too late. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the hearing, knowing that the path I had chosen was the only one I could take. The hearing was everything I had imagined it would be, and nothing like I had expected. The courthouse was intimidating, filled with people coming and going, all of them carrying their own stories of conflict, of betrayal, of justice. But none of those stories mattered today. Today, it was just about me and Ethan. I arrived early, dressed in my professional attire, but the nerves were impossible to shake. I was used to handling stress at work, but this was different. This wasn't just another case. It was my life, my family, my brother. And here we were, at the point where all the talking, all the lies, and all the broken promises would come to a head. As I walked through the heavy courthouse doors, I was hit with a wave of uncertainty. What if I wasn't doing the right thing? What if I was making a huge mistake by pushing forward with this lawsuit? I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I had come this far. There was no turning back now. The courtroom was stark, filled with the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything feel colder, more sterile. I was led to a small seat near the front, my lawyer beside me, both of us silent, waiting for Ethan and his attorney to arrive. The seconds ticked by like hours, and with each minute, I could feel my anxiety growing. What would Ethan say? Would he finally take responsibility for everything, or would he continue to make excuses? I couldn't help but replay the conversations we'd had, each one feeling like a betrayal, each one leading us here, to this moment. And then, just as I was beginning to lose my patience, the door opened. Ethan walked in, followed by his lawyer, a man I had never seen before. He looked different, older somehow, his face drawn and weary. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that hung in the air like smoke. He avoided my gaze as he took a seat across from me, and the room fell silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the low murmur of the attorneys. I could feel his presence. His guilt, his anger, his desperation. He didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be here. But we both knew it was inevitable. The judge entered the room and took his seat, signaling for everyone to be quiet. He was an older man, his face stern but not unkind. He wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "This is a simple case, it seems," the judge began, his voice firm. "A loan was given, and now the borrower refuses to repay it. Miss Carter, you claim that Mr. Thornton owes you $10,000, correct?" I nodded, feeling my throat tighten as I heard my own voice speak for the first time in this space. Yes, Your Honor. That's correct. And Mr. Thornton. The judge turned his attention to Ethan. You dispute that claim and insist that the money was a gift, not a loan? Ethan shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable under the judge's gaze. That's right, Your Honor, he said, his voice wavering slightly. I never intended to borrow that money. It was always meant to be a gift from me to my sister. I clenched my fists, the words burning my skin. A gift? It was the same lie he had been telling everyone, and I could hear it now in the sterile walls of the courtroom. The judge turned his eyes back to me. Miss Carter, do you have any evidence to support your claim that this was, in fact, a loan? I took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I said, pulling the documents from my bag. I have bank statements, text messages, and emails from Ethan where he explicitly asked for the loan and agreed to pay it back. I also have a signed contract where we both agreed on the repayment terms. I handed the papers over to the judge, who flipped through them methodically. Ethan's lawyer didn't seem worried. In fact, he smiled almost smugly. Your Honor, I would like to point out that none of these documents explicitly state the money was a loan. It's all very vague, and the so-called contract can easily be interpreted as a misunderstanding. I felt my blood boil at his words. The manipulation, the disregard for the truth. It was all so typical. The judge raised a hand to silence the room, then leaned forward, his voice sharp. Miss Carter, can you explain how you arrived at the decision to sue your own brother over this? The question hit me harder than I expected. For a split second, I froze. The judge wasn't questioning the legitimacy of my claim. He was asking about the emotional side of things. And for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. I thought of Ethan, the brother I had once trusted. The brother who had promised me time and time again that he would pay me back. The brother who had lied, who had manipulated me, who had caused all this pain. I had no choice, I said, my voice steady, but with the undercurrent of pain that I had been holding in for so long. He took advantage of me. He manipulated me into giving him money, and now he's pretending it was a gift, knowing full well it wasn't. I've tried to talk to him, tried to resolve this without going this far, but he left me no other option. The room was silent, and even Ethan seemed to shrink under the weight of my words. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Ethan. Mr. Thornton, you've heard your sister's testimony. Is there anything further you would like to add? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. After a moment, he closed his mouth and looked down at the table in front of him. The judge took a deep breath. I see. We'll take a short recess to review the evidence. Everyone please remain in the courtroom. As the judge left the room, I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. I had said my piece, laid out the truth for everyone to hear. But in that silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Ethan wasn't done yet. There was more to this, more I hadn't seen. And I couldn't help but wonder what he would do next to try to fix everything, and if he even could. The recess seemed to stretch on for an eternity. As I sat there, alone in my thoughts, the weight of everything, the lawsuit, the betrayal, the years of history with Ethan pressed down on me. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Every time I did, I saw the boy I had once trusted, the one who had promised me things that he never intended to keep. I couldn't be fooled again. Ethan sat across from me, his eyes darting nervously around the room. His lawyer was talking to him in low tones, but he didn't seem to be listening. I could see it in his face. the fear, the regret, and the stubbornness that had always been his greatest flaw. He couldn't admit when he was wrong. And now, here we were, caught in a battle where the truth wasn't enough to clear the air. I glanced down at my hands, still clutching the documents, the proof that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, that this wasn't just a family dispute over something petty. This was bigger than that. This was about trust. This was about me, standing up for myself after so many years of being taken advantage of. The door opened, and I didn't have to look up to know that the judge had returned. The room shifted with the sudden change in energy, and we all stood as he made his way back to the bench. The weight of the moment seemed to settle in as everyone took their places, the tension rising again. "Please be seated," the judge said, his voice commanding attention. "We've reviewed the evidence, and I have come to a decision." I held my breath, my chest tightening with the anticipation of what was to come. This was it. Everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, was about to culminate in this moment. My hands were clammy, but I didn't let it show. The judge cleared his throat and looked directly at Ethan. "Mr. Thornton, the evidence presented is clear. You signed an agreement stating that this money was a loan, and while you have argued that it was a gift, no such understanding has been established in writing or through any other reliable means. Your claim is inconsistent, and I find that your actions have not been in good faith." Ethan's face drained of color, and he looked down at the table, his jaw clenched tight. He knew what was coming. He had no more tricks left. The judge turned to me then, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Carter, I understand that this has been a difficult process for you. The court recognizes that you acted within your rights to pursue this case, and I am prepared to issue a ruling in your favor." I exhaled slowly, the tension in my body easing just a fraction. But there was still something in the pit of my stomach, something that told me this wasn't over. Not yet. "However," the judge continued, his voice firm, "the court will allow Mr. Thornton a final opportunity to resolve this matter outside of litigation. I encourage both parties to consider mediation before we proceed with further legal action. That is my ruling." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me, my breath catching in my throat. Mediation? Wasn't this already clear enough? Ethan had refused to take responsibility, had played games with me for months, and now he was being given a chance to avoid the consequences once again. Ethan's lawyer spoke up before I could process my thoughts. "Your Honor, we are willing to explore mediation. We believe it's in the best interest of both parties." I wanted to protest, to say that it was too little, too late. But the judge's word was final, and I couldn't afford to make things worse. The idea of sitting down with Ethan again, trying to work this out outside of court, seemed impossible. What if he tried to manipulate me again? What if it was all another ploy? The judge glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you are entitled to the ruling in your favor, but I ask that you consider the alternative. Mediation is a voluntary process that can save both of you time and money. I encourage you to think about it carefully." I wanted to scream, to argue that there was no way to fix this with a simple conversation. But I held my tongue. There was no point in fighting the process now. The wheels had already been set in motion. "Thank you, Your Honor," I finally said, my voice tight. Ethan didn't look at me as the judge dismissed the case for the day, and I felt a surge of emotions, anger, relief, uncertainty. Part of me wanted to walk out of the room right then and never speak to him again. But the other part, the part that still loved him, even after everything, knew that this wasn't the end. Not yet. As I stood and gathered my things, Ethan's lawyer approached me, his face polite but businesslike. "Miss Carter, if you're open to it, we would be happy to arrange a mediation session at your convenience." I nodded stiffly, not trusting myself to speak. I had said everything I needed to say in that courtroom. It was Ethan's turn now if he wanted to fix this. When I stepped out of the courtroom, the air felt heavier than ever. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered, and I wasn't sure what to make of the judge's decision. Was this really the right way to resolve things? Or was this just another way for Ethan to avoid facing the consequences of his actions? One thing was certain. I wasn't done fighting. This wasn't over. The days after the hearing passed in a blur of uncertainty. I had agreed to mediation, but I still wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Every time I thought about it, I felt a mix of dread and hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, we could work things out. But a deeper, stronger part of me still felt like it was all a waste of time, a final attempt to appease Ethan, who had always taken the easy way out. The mediation was scheduled for the following week, and I tried my best to prepare myself mentally for what was to come. The thought of sitting across from Ethan again, after everything that had happened, seemed impossible. But I knew I couldn't back down now. I couldn't let him think he had won. I couldn't let him think that his lies had any power over me. When the day arrived, I walked into the mediation room with my lawyer at my side, trying to keep my composure. The space was neutral, meant to feel less intimidating than a courtroom. But the tension in the air was suffocating. I knew what was at stake. This was my last chance to take control of the situation, to get the closure I had been searching for. Ethan was already there, sitting across from the table, looking almost unrecognizable. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to have settled in his bones. He was fiddling with a pen, his eyes avoiding mine as if he couldn't bear the weight of what we were about to face. His lawyer sat next to him, watching the proceedings with a quiet intensity, but I could tell that Ethan wasn't fully present. His eyes darted around the room, and when he finally looked up at me, his gaze was filled with something I hadn't expected. Regret. It was fleeting, but it was there, a shadow of the brother I had once known. "Miss Carter," the mediator began, her voice calm and professional. "Thank you for coming today. I know this has been a difficult process for both of you. Our goal here is to reach a resolution that works for everyone, without the need for further legal action." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't trust the process, but I was here. I had to see it through. "We've reviewed the evidence from the court proceedings," she continued, "and it's clear that there is a dispute regarding the nature of the money in question. Mr. Thornton has maintained that it was a gift, while Miss Carter insists it was a loan. Our goal today is to clear up that misunderstanding." I glanced at Ethan, who was staring at his hands now, almost as if he were trying to disappear. The sight made something in me shift. Maybe it was the apology I had been waiting for, or maybe it was the exhaustion in his eyes, but in that moment, I realized that Ethan was no longer the person he had been when this all started. He was different. But was it enough? The mediator turned to him. "Mr. Thornton, why don't you start by explaining your side of the story? Tell us why you believe the money was a gift." Ethan took a deep breath, his voice low and hesitant. "Look, I know I screwed up. I'm not here to make excuses. But when Liv gave me that money, it wasn't supposed to be a loan. I wasn't planning to pay it back. I know I didn't communicate that properly, and I get that it hurt her. I didn't realize at the time how serious it was. I thought she knew. His words hung in the air, heavy and unfinished. There was a hint of remorse there, but also a sense of self-preservation. He was still trying to justify himself, trying to explain away his actions instead of fully owning up to them. I couldn't let it slide. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice tight but steady. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You asked me for the loan, and you promised you'd pay me back. Over and over again. I have the texts. I have the emails. You can't just pretend like none of that happened." The mediator glanced between us, sensing the tension in the room. "Miss Carter, I understand this is difficult, but let's try to focus on finding a resolution, not rehashing past mistakes." I took a breath, trying to calm the anger that was rising in my chest. "I'm sorry, but this isn't something I can just let go of. Ethan didn't just borrow money from me. He lied to me. He used me. He made promises he never intended to keep. And when I needed him to do the right thing, he turned his back on me." Ethan shifted in his seat, his expression hardening for a moment before he looked down at the table again. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Liv," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I was in a bad place, and I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought if I could just convince you it was a gift, I wouldn't have to face the truth. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." For a moment there was silence. The weight of his apology hung between us, and I could feel the years of anger and disappointment slowly starting to unravel. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to forget everything he had put me through. "You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay, Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've hurt me too much. I don't trust you anymore. I don't think I ever will." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he just sat there, looking defeated. The silence stretched on, thick with everything that had been said, and everything that still needed to be said. The mediator cleared her throat, trying to steer the conversation back on course. "I think we're at a standstill here. What we need now is to discuss the next steps, to find a way forward." But I couldn't focus on the mediation anymore. My mind was too clouded with everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayal, the realization that Ethan might never truly change. The path forward seemed unclear, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find a resolution with him. Not like this. As the mediation session drew to a close, I stood up, my heart heavy, my thoughts swirling. I had come here hoping for answers, for some kind of closure, but instead, all I had was more uncertainty. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Ethan wasn't the person I thought he was, and I couldn't keep trying to fix him. I had to focus on myself now, on finding peace after everything that had been shattered. When I walked out of the room, I didn't look back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The days that followed the mediation were some of the hardest of my life. My mind kept replaying the moments from the session, the apology, the regret in Ethan's eyes, and the overwhelming realization that things could never be the same between us. I wanted to move forward, to find closure, but part of me still couldn't let go of the years of trust I had placed in him, only for it to be shattered. I spent more time than I wanted to admit trying to make sense of everything. I found myself avoiding calls from family, unsure of what to say or how to explain what had happened. I had thought I could fix things, that a simple resolution would be enough. But the truth was, the damage had already been done, and no amount of mediation or apologies would ever erase the betrayal. One afternoon, As I was sorting through some old files in my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister, Anna. My heart skipped a beat, and for a brief moment I thought about ignoring it. But I couldn't. I had to know if she was okay, if she had heard anything from Ethan since the mediation. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. Liv, Ethan wants to talk. He says it's important. He's been calling and texting nonstop. Please, can you just listen to him? I know things are bad right now, but I really think he's trying to fix things. I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of emotions. Anger, frustration, and a gnawing doubt that I could trust my own instincts anymore. Ethan had been so convincing during the mediation, but his words hadn't meant much after everything he had put me through. I had already tried to give him a chance. I didn't want to make the same mistake again. But Anna's message tugged at me. She was my sister. She didn't know everything that had happened behind closed doors. She only saw the pieces I let her see. I sat down on the couch, staring at the phone, trying to decide what to do. A part of me wanted to reach out to Ethan, to hear him out one last time, just to see if he truly was sorry. But another part of me was terrified. What if it was another lie? What if this was all just a way for him to wiggle out of responsibility once again? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made a decision. I had to hear him out. Not for him, but for me. I needed to know if there was any shred of truth left in his words, if anything had changed. I texted Anna back. Tell him I'll meet him, but this is the last time, Anna. I can't keep doing this. She responded quickly. Thank you. I know it's hard, but I think you're making the right choice. I wasn't so sure, but there was no turning back now. The next day, we arranged to meet at a small cafe, a neutral spot where we could talk in private. As I walked inside, my heart raced in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. Would he show up, pleading for forgiveness? Would he try to make excuses again? I spotted him right away, sitting by the window, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked tired, really tired, like someone who had been carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. But there was something else there too, something that made my stomach twist. He looked vulnerable, almost lost. I took a deep breath and walked over to him, my steps slow and deliberate. When he saw me, he stood up quickly, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and hesitation. Liv, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. Thank you for meeting me. I didn't say anything at first, just sat down across from him and waited. I didn't want to rush into anything. I needed to hear him out, but I also needed to keep my guard up. He had proven time and time again that he wasn't to be trusted. I know I've messed everything up, Ethan began, his voice shaky. I can't take back what I did, but I can try to make it right. I've been thinking a lot about everything, the money, the lies, the way I've treated you, and I realize I've hurt you more than I ever should have. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Ethan, you say you're sorry, but that doesn't fix everything. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. You've betrayed me, lied to me, and taken advantage of me for so long. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I know. I don't know how to fix it. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can to make things right. I know it won't be easy, and I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw someone who was truly broken. But could I trust him again? Could I let him back into my life after everything? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain the pain I had carried for so long, the years of silence and disappointment? Instead, I stood up abruptly. I can't make any decisions right now, Ethan. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. I need time. Time to figure out if there's even anything left worth saving. He didn't try to stop me when I turned and walked away. He didn't call out my name. It was almost as if he knew I needed space, that I needed to find my own way through this. But part of me knew it wasn't over. Maybe, in time, I'd find a way to heal. Maybe we could rebuild our relationship, but only if he was willing to prove that he had truly changed. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to trust him again. But for now, that seemed like a distant dream, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to chase. The weeks that followed the cafe meeting felt like an endless cycle of uncertainty. I stayed away from Ethan, focused on my work, and spent more time with friends who had always supported me. But there was an undercurrent of tension in my life now, a constant reminder that something was broken, that something I once cherished had been shattered. I still couldn't fully process what Ethan had said in the cafe. His apology had seemed genuine, but words alone weren't enough to heal the wounds he had caused. I thought about the years we had spent together, the bond we had shared, and how easily it had all crumbled. Trust was something I had always taken for granted, until it was ripped away. But as much as I tried to push Ethan out of my mind, the memories crept back in, uninvited. I remembered the times I had been there for him when no one else was. The times I had loaned him money, not expecting anything in return, only to be met with betrayal. And yet, despite the anger I felt, there was still a part of me that missed the brother-in-law I had once known. I didn't know if that part of me would ever return, but I couldn't keep going in circles, caught between anger and longing. One evening, just as I was winding down for the night, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Anna. My heart sank as I saw her name on the screen, and for a moment, I hesitated. Would she try to convince me to give Ethan another chance? I wasn't sure I was ready for that conversation, but curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the message. "Liv, I need to talk to you. It's about Ethan. I know things have been tense, but there's something you need to hear." My stomach twisted, and I quickly replied, "What's going on?" Her response came almost immediately. "Ethan's been making some big changes. He's been getting therapy, and he's finally addressing the issues that have been holding him back for years. I'm not saying it's a quick fix, but he's really trying, Liv. I think you should give him a chance to explain more." I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to process her words. Therapy ? Changes? I hadn't expected any of that. Was he really serious about changing, or was this just another attempt to make everything go back to the way it was? The thought made my head spin. I don't know, Anna. It's hard to believe anything after everything that's happened. I need time to think. I could almost feel her sigh through the text. I get it. But just promise me you'll hear him out. I think it's important. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't know if I could do this, if I could open myself up to the possibility of reconciliation after everything he had put me through. But the idea of him trying to change, of him making an effort to address his flaws, made something stir within me. Could I let go of the past and give him that chance? The next few days were filled with quiet reflection. I spent time reading, journaling, and talking to friends who had always been there for me. They reminded me of my strength, of how far I had come, and how I had always been able to rise above whatever life threw at me. But the question lingered. Could I rise above Ethan's betrayal? I thought about the conversations I had with my friends, the ones who had seen me at my lowest and helped me find my way back. They didn't have all the answers, but they helped me see the bigger picture. I had a choice to make. I didn't have to forgive Ethan for my own peace, but I could decide whether or not he deserved a second chance in my life. Then, one afternoon, as I sat in my apartment, reflecting on everything, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. My hand hovered over the screen, uncertainty gripping me. Should I answer? Should I give him another chance to speak? After everything, did I even want to? I let the phone ring for a moment before picking it up. Liv. His voice cracked through the phone, and for the first time, I heard the vulnerability that had been absent in our previous conversations. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm working on myself. I've been seeing a therapist. I've been addressing everything. My mistakes, my choices, my lies. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but I want to be a better person. For me, for you. I just wanted you to know that. The words were raw and real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a small flicker of hope. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't trying to manipulate me into forgiving him. He was simply telling me where he was in his journey. It was a step, a small one, but a step nonetheless. I don't know if I can trust you again, Ethan, I said softly, my voice trembling. But I appreciate you being honest with me. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know if we'll ever be close again. But for now, I need to take care of myself. I need time, and I need to figure out what I want from this. There was silence on the other end. For a moment, I thought he might say something to convince me, to ask for more. But instead, he simply said, I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I didn't know if I would ever fully heal from what Ethan had done. But in that moment, I realized that healing wasn't something anyone else could give me. It was something I had to find within myself. As the days passed, I took small steps toward rebuilding my own life. I focused on my career, my friends, and my own well-being. And maybe, just maybe in time, I would be able to forgive Ethan, not for him, but for me. Whether or not that meant allowing him back into my life, only time would tell. But I knew one thing for sure. I would no longer be defined by his mistakes. I would move forward on my own terms, stronger than I had ever been before.